The tunnels beneath Zoa City were not built for comfort. They were built for access, narrow concrete corridors running alongside the pipe infrastructure, just wide enough for a maintenance worker to move through with equipment, lit by strips of cold LED lighting that turned everything the same flat gray. The air down there was damp and heavy and carried the faint metallic smell of old concrete and moving water. You could hear the pipes from the moment you dropped in, a low constant presence, not loud, just there, the way a heartbeat is there. The sound of 4 million people's daily lives moving through walls of composite material 8 inches thick. Thomas Hale had been doing underground inspections for 14 years, and he stopped noticing the smell after the first 5 minutes. What he never stopped noticing was the sound. He had learned over the years to read it the way sailors read water. The difference between a pipe that was healthy and a pipe that was working too hard was something you felt before you measured it. He didn't like what he was hearing before they reached the first inspection point. The team was 4 people. Thomas leading, 2 structural technicians named Ray and Sujin behind him, and a younger engineer named Damon who was on his 3rd field inspection and was still at the stage where he found the tunnels interesting rather than familiar. They carried acoustic scanning equipment, handheld devices that pressed against the pipe wall and read the material density beneath the surface, the way a doctor uses an ultrasound to see inside a body without cutting it open. The technology was precise enough to detect a fracture the width of a human hair from the outside of an 8-inch wall. They had 18 inspection points mapped across the corridor. Marcus had identified them from the sensor data, the locations where the pressure events had been strongest, where the stress pattern suggested the fracturing was most advanced. The plan was straightforward. Work through all 18 points, document what the scanners found, call it in. They reached the first point 12 minutes after dropping in. Ray pressed the scanner against the pipe wall and they all looked at the display together. Thomas looked at the reading for a moment and then asked Ray to run it again. Ray ran it again. The reading was the same. The fractures Marcus had identified from the sensor data were real. That part they had expected. What they had not expected was the depth of them. On the surface of the pipe wall, the outer layer of composite material, the fractures were exactly what the acoustic data had suggested. Hairline split spreading laterally, the material slowly delaminating under years of pressure cycling. Serious, but the kind of serious that still had some time attached to it. But the scanner wasn't just reading the surface. It was reading all the way through. The inner layer of the pipe wall, the side that the water actually touched, the side that bore the direct force of the pressure every single time demand surged, was worse. Significantly worse. The fractures hadn't just spread laterally across the surface. They had worked their way inward, through the middle layer of the composite, and were now sitting less than 2 centimeters from the inner wall. 2 centimeters between the fracture and open water moving at full system pressure. Thomas knew exactly what that meant. When a fracture reached the inner wall, it didn't fail slowly. The pressure on the other side was not gentle. It had been pushing against that wall every single day for over 30 years. The moment it found an opening, even a small one, it would take it. Fast and hard and without warning. He told Ray and Damon to keep moving. They had 17 more points to check. By the time they reached the 8th inspection point, nobody was talking much. Every single location was the same story. Surface fractures spreading. Surface fractures spreading. Inner wall fractures deeper than the surface suggested. And at 3 of the 8 points they had checked so far, the fractures had done something worse than simply progress inward. They had migrated into the connection joints. The points where the main distribution pipe branched upward into the smaller service lines feeding buildings above. Damon asked Thomas what that meant practically. Thomas told him it meant the weakest points in the system were not in the middle of the pipes. They were at the joints. The branching points. And a joint failure was different from a pipe wall failure because a joint connected multiple lines. When a joint went, it didn't affect one direction of flow. It affected everything attached to it, the main line, the service lines above, the pressure balance of the surrounding network. Damon was quiet for a moment and then asked how many joints they were looking at. Thomas said they hadn't finished the inspection yet. They kept moving. They finished all 18 points in just under 4 hours. Thomas sat in the tunnel with his back against the concrete wall and went through the scanner data on his tablet while the others drank water and said very little. The LED lights hummed softly above them. The pipes kept up their low constant sound, water moving through fractures it didn't know were there yet. The final count was not what any of them had wanted. 14 of the 18 inspection points showed inner wall fractures within 2 centimeters of failure depth. Not eventually, within the current operational stress range. Meaning the next time the system hit a high demand surge, those 14 points would be carrying full pressure against walls that were 2 centimeters away from giving. 7 of those 14 points were at connection joints. 7 joints. Spread across a 40-kilometer corridor. Each one connected to service lines feeding hospitals, residential towers, the commercial district. If those 7 joints failed in the same pressure surge, and they would, because a surge didn't hit one point, it hit the whole corridor simultaneously, the failures would cascade faster than any rerouting system could respond. Marcus had told the council the city could lose water to the central district. Thomas looked at his tablet and understood that Marcus had actually been conservative. He climbed out of the tunnel at 7:40 in the evening and stood on the street for a moment in the cool air, the city moving normally around him. People walking. Lights on in the towers above. Somewhere nearby a food cart was still open, the smell of it drifting down the block. Everything looked exactly the way it always looked. A city that worked. A city that had figured things out. Thomas called Rourke. He read the numbers clearly and without drama because that was how Thomas operated, just the facts, just the findings, nothing added and nothing softened. He told Rourke about the 14 points. He told him about the 7 joints. He told him what a simultaneous joint failure across that corridor would actually do to the districts above. The line was quiet for a long moment. Rourke asked Thomas how confident he was in the readings. Thomas said he was completely confident. That they had run every point twice. That the data was clean. Another silence. Longer this time. Then Rourke said he would call an emergency session of the full council for the following morning and that Thomas should have his full inspection report ready by then. Thomas said it would be ready. He hung up and stood on the street a moment longer. The city kept moving around him, indifferent and alive, every light in every tower above him fed by a system that was now, officially, past the point of quiet concern. They were in the emergency zone now. And the first high-risk pressure window was in 7 days. The council would authorize emergency action the following morning. But authorizing it and actually doing it were 2 entirely different problems because what the engineering team was being asked to do had never been done before in Zoa City. You couldn't shut the water off. You couldn't tell 4 million people to wait. You had to replace the veins of a living body while the body kept breathing. And the man who had to figure out how to do that was already awake at 3 a.m. staring at a problem that had no clean answer.